Welcome on into Love of the Star, Super Bowl edition. It's Super Bowl week. Zach Wolchuk alongside Brian Broaddus, the Super Bowl winning scout. As we're hanging out here in New Orleans, we actually did try to record yesterday on Radio Row, and it would have been cool. You would have gotten the backdrop of everything going on. It's one of the best, I think, radio rows that I've gotten to experience now, year 3, coming out here. But unfortunately, the Wi-Fi wasn't working for us. So now we're in our hotel rooms, but there's always Cowboy content to discuss. But Brian, for you having actually participated and won a Super Bowl, how is this week for you? Like, it's always probably got to bring up some good memories.
Yeah, it does, and especially with it here being in New Orleans, and that's the Super Bowl that, as you mentioned, Super Bowl 31. So, gosh, it seems like forever. But yeah, the week tends to go by, it feels like so slowly. And, you've done a lot of your work at home. You've put a lot of your game plan in at home. You're just waiting for the game. And, you practice, you have your walkthroughs. You really don't want to get anybody hurt. So you're just, there's meetings, there's time that you try and spend a little time with your family or friends that are here, but you're really focused on this game. And when it becomes a reality is when you get on the buses to go to the game, and they've basically blocked the entire city for you to get to the stadium. Like, you do not see a car. So like the police escort, you were driving through, it's something like out of one of those zombie apocalypse movies, where there's like the last person on earth kind of thing. And it's just so surreal to be driving through major city and having no cars, no people, nothing around you. You just, you're going to the game, and then you actually get to the game, and then the anticipation of being there. I just remember a little funny story. Jim McMahon was our backup quarterback, and I'll never forget sitting in the locker room there at the Superdome at the time, and everybody's just super quiet, and nobody's really doing anything. Everybody's just and McMahon takes a football, and he throws it at a nameplate of one of the wide receivers across the locker room, and he misses the nameplate. So Favre sees what he's doing, and Favre takes a ball, tries to hit the same nameplate. So now there's a competition with everybody trying to knock each other's nameplate out of their slots, and the balls are bouncing everywhere, and you're like going, this is not what it's probably supposed to be like before a Super Bowl game, but here we are, and Jim McMahon just kind of having fun, and everybody getting involved in it. Mike Holmgren, the coach, walks in, is like, what the hell's going on here? And coach, we're just having a little fun, and everybody then kind of locks back in. So, but yeah, it's unlike any other game you get ready for, because it's just, there's so much intensity and focus, and but man, the time, Zach, goes by so slowly. And you gotta do things to kind of entertain yourself, and like Jim McMahon did in the locker room before the game.
I love it. I love that story. And I also, I felt last year, obviously, was in Vegas, this year, New Orleans. Like, these are awesome nightlife cities, right? Yeah. So as a coach and somebody that's, in the front office, I'm sure you're just like, every day we just got to survive. Please, fingers crossed, no incidents with players.
Yeah. And the way that things are nowadays with social media and how rampant it is. Even you and I working at Radio Row, we see it. We see all the podcasters, the TV people, the radio people. And there's so much more focus, and and I think that's good. It's great that we have as much access to this game and the games around in our sport as we do. But man, I could not imagine with today's social media and stuff how that would affect how we would have played in '96. Boy, that would have been an interesting. Probably would have even told a funnier story of all the characters, like the Andre Risons and the Jim McMahons and the Brett Favres and those guys that were on our roster.
It's amazing as we count down to Eagles and Chiefs. Maybe one day, maybe 2025, we'll get our Dallas Cowboys in this game. we can pray to the football gods that something will break
Yeah.
their way. We do have the staff that's really filling out here, Brian. And I do think, for Cowboy fans that are looking for hope or looking for optimism, I think there's some hirings here that make you feel like, okay, this is a little different. Cowboys hired former Saints running backs coach Derek Foster. He's now going to be their new running backs coach. He was with the Chargers for a few years previously before New Orleans. Andrew Whitecotton is the new defensive line coach. Friday, we got the news Clayton Adams became official on Monday. He's now the offensive coordinator, comes over from Arizona, who's able to run a very unique, complex, really innovative rushing attack, which we've been hoping for. And then Eberflus continues. And I know you got to run in with him while we were doing one of our shows out on remote, which maybe you can share some of that conversation. But all in all, I mean, what are you thinking of Shoddy's staff so far? Some guys that they're not necessarily super familiar with, like Whitecotton, and then the other coaches that they brought in with Clayton Adams don't really have familiarity with Shoddy or anybody else on the staff.
No, they don't. And that's the really, I think the positive thing with this coaching staff is that there's some coaches now. You bring back Lunda Wells, which I think was a very good re-signing for the Cowboys. I think Lunda had done a really nice job with the tight ends, and he continues to be able to do that work. There's people in the organization, you've probably heard me say this before, that believe that he could have absolutely be your offensive line coach if they had to. Now, with Adams, I was told right now that Adams will coach the offensive line and Lunda will coach the tight ends. There's some whispers that maybe that they might go out and get another offensive line coach. We'll see how that all plays out. But as of right now, as you and I tape this broadcast, it is going to be Wells at tight end, Adams at offensive line, and that's fine if that's how it works out. You made mention I had a chance to visit, with Matt Eberflus. It was kind of funny. We were on our show on remote, and they happened to be staying at a hotel next to the Star, and Matt, that he was going on his way to the Star, and just so happened that Ruben Portilla, our engineer, said, "Hey, I think that's Eberflus," and I jumped up, as you saw, took my headset off and said, "Hey guys, I got to go for a second." So I went and talked to Flus, and I yelled at him. I'm like, "Hey, Flus!" He turned the corner, he looked back, he says, "Brian Broaddus, how you doing, man?" I said, "I'm great, doing radio, da 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 da," and just kind of talking to him about how excited I was to see him again, how happy, with unfortunately what happened with him with the Bears. Didn't bring up any questions like, "Hey man, why didn't you call a timeout?" You could have probably called a timeout and won that game.
Oh, that infamous Thanksgiving Day game.
Yeah, no questions there. But he was excited about the staff he was putting together. He was excited about the opportunity of coming back to Dallas. He was excited about the players that he was going to get to work with. We'll see how many players he actually gets to work with, because that's a pretty significant free agent list over there when you talk about Oso Digizua, Golston, Jordan Lewis, guys like that. This is probably going to be the cornerstone will be, of course, Micah Parsons. And, you'll have to build around some young players that they have currently on the roster. But it's going to look remarkably different, I think, than what we've seen in the last few years under like the Dan Quinn administration and the Mike Zimmer administration that has been here the last 4 years. So it's an exciting time. I'm glad that they're hiring coaches that are outside of the organization. That tells me that the front office, yes, they can make suggestions about, hey, would you consider this guy? Would you consider this guy? I think they're letting Shoddy and Flus and those guys hire the coaches that they're comfortable being with. So we'll see how it shakes out here, and in this season.
So the other development that occurred yesterday here at Radio Row, we had Zach Martin and Brandon Aubrey walking around, and Zach Martin was asked several questions, mainly about his future. And he did have an interesting quote saying, "I think people forget I'm a free agent too. I'll figure out if I am, where I'm playing, and if I'm not, then obviously you guys will hear about that, just trying to get healthy, make a decision down the road." So for Zach, it's one, does he want to keep playing? Does he decide, hey, I am ready to retire? Health, I think, will go a long way towards that. He did specify in that quote, hey, I just want to get healthy. But he is a free agent. And it didn't sound like he was necessarily closing the door on testing the free agent market. And it's a foregone conclusion if he wants to keep playing, he's coming back to the Cowboys.
Right.
What are we thinking about Zach Martin's future right now?
I think I think that if you absolutely want Zach Martin back, you're going to have to convince him to come play for you. If Zach Martin is talking about getting healthy and not talking about retirement, then I think there's a good chance that you're going to have to not only recruit Zach Martin, you're going to have to pay Zach Martin. And there's probably some teams out there that if he's interested in playing again, that will give him an opportunity. We saw what Tyron Smith, what Tyron Smith was able to do. Tyron Smith had a nice season a couple of years ago, but the Cowboys were, willing to draft Tyler Guyton and move on from Tyron Smith. I guess the same could be said for Zach Martin here. I think that if Zach Martin wants to play, the Dallas Cowboys are going to have to, if they're interested, they're going to have to get in there and make a legitimate offer. I don't think you can veteran minimum him or lowball him in any way. If he's healthy and ready to go and wants to give it another campaign, I'm sure one of the other 31 teams would be very interested in having a guy like Zach Martin on their roster for 1 season, 2 seasons, however long that Zach feels like he is able to go. But last season was, by all standards, was one of just as really a disaster for him when it came to his health and then the level of play. I think the level of play had a lot to do with how banged up he really was, and we kind of felt like that Father Time is undefeated, as we all know. Was starting to get the better of him. But if he is thinking about saddling this thing up again, then I think all teams would be absolutely interested in hearing what it's going to take to get him to play at his all-pro Hall of Fame right guard position.
I think that's probably where I'm struggling as someone who, like, Zach Martin's probably on my fan Mount Rushmore of all-time favorite Cowboys. I hate the idea of him going out like that.
Yeah.
But we did just see it with Tyron Smith, and he
Absolutely.
left, and he was in a New York Jets uniform last year. Could we be in year 2 for that? And then from a Cowboys perspective, I guess you have to figure out in watching the All-22, I think we started to see 2 years ago, Zach Martin wasn't quite the same level that he were accustomed to seeing, the All-Pro Zach Martin, to your point, Brian. So as much as I'd like to say this is injury-related, and if he's healthy, Zach's still somebody you want on your team, they do got to figure out, hey, is Father Time really just catching up to him, and should they just go ahead and move on? And maybe that's through the draft. Maybe that's in-house if they want to shuffle some things. Maybe they liked what they saw from a Brock Hoffman. I know we have discussed, I think the more you see Brock Hoffman, the more you're realizing, okay, he is a really good backup player to come in and play for you in a pinch. But if he's got to start 17 games, you might see some of those warts.
I think you put it very well, Zach. Brock Hoffman for 5 to 6 games is winning football. Brock Hoffman for 17 weeks might not be the best recipe. And I think that's why with you and I, the way that we work on the draft, the way that we talk about potentially, guys that could be the Bookers from Alabama. My personal favorite, though, when you look at him or Banks from Texas, the tackle, Campbell from LSU, these, who would be a guy that could come in and probably is better suited to play guard than play tackle? And there's several of those. This draft is full of guys that have, and it's not just a flexibility thing. It might be ability in college, and it might be just the way their body types are structured that they're going to have to play certain positions. So it's a interesting group of offensive linemen. If the Cowboys go that route, they have to be encouraged by what they saw with Brock Hoffman. There's going to be, do you think about, well, move Cooper Beebe? And that's, to me, that's one of those things, man. You've invested a year in him. You've got him playing at a pretty nice level with the opportunity of probably getting better at the position. And considering what this offensive line coach likes to do with outside zone, inside zone, the pin and pulls, the counters, the traps, having an athletic center makes a world of difference. And the one thing Cooper Beebe got better at was not only handling blocks along the line of scrimmage, but second level blocks. And so do you just say, okay, we're going to flush a year of Cooper Beebe working at center to play him at guard? That's always a possibility. Then, I haven't yet to see a center in this draft that I really like, Zach. And so to me, that's probably going to, if they're going to move guys, it's probably going to have to be internal. And, I wonder, can the Cowboys afford to draft another offensive lineman? Can they afford to take another tackle? And I know you and I have talked about Josh Simmons from Ohio State. There's some medical concerns that you're going to have to deal with, but addressing this offensive line could very well likely come from some internal candidates more so than maybe even bringing Zach Martin back.
This is the Love of the Star podcast. You're listening to Love of the Star. It is an Audacy podcast. You can find it on the Audacy app or wherever you get your podcast. Zach Wolchuk alongside Brian Broaddus as we're live here in New Orleans, Radio Row, just down the street from us. And it is time now to open up some of your questions. The Dean Julia mailbag segment. Now, last week, Brian, I had to say, hey, Dean Julia, I didn't get a question from you. This week, though, Dean Julia is coming in clutch. He's got a question for us here on Love of the Star. And question number one, how differently do you think the safety room could look in 2025? And what route would you go?
Yeah, I mean, listen, I'll let you. Do you got some ideas on that, how you would like to handle the safety room? Do you first off, do you feel like that you got the absolute best play from Hooker, Wilson, Thomas? How did you feel about the safety room last year for the Dallas Cowboys?
I thought that there were games where Donovan Wilson was really good. But all in all, I didn't think it was one of his best years. It was frustrating to me, and Malik Hooker, I thought, probably played his best football at the end of the season. And it's one of those things where, like, football IQ is what you always hear about with Malik Hooker. And to me, I just don't – I think you can upgrade there, right, personally. I think Wanye Thomas is a guy that probably needs to get some more opportunity, hopefully moving forward. But this is one of those drafts, Brian, where I do like a lot of the safeties. I mean,
I do too.
Where are you going to, like, is it to where you're going to spend a premium position like a second rounder? But I mean, it's going to be very difficult for me not to consider, say, at 44, an Xavier Watts out of Notre Dame if he's there. Like, the tape is great. Andrew Makuba from Texas, physical, but also is a ball hawk guy.
Exactly.
Like, I think now there was a lot of buzz about Malachi Starks out of Georgia as a top 10 pick. And I'm starting to see that kind of drop now, which which meets my eye. Because, like, there's times I like Malachi Starks is a good player, but in big games, like the first half against Alabama, he's missing tackles. Notre Dame in the playoff game, misjudging the football, missing tackles. Like, and you could probably pick on that with every player, but I think it's closer between Starks and, say, a Watts and a Makuba and some of the other safeties in this draft than what it was initially made out to be. So I think you could definitely upgrade through the draft at safety. This is a good safety draft.
Yeah, I have Starks outside outside the first round. I mean, and you mentioned I have Watts and Starks, Makuba. I really like this kid Winston from Penn State quite a bit. I might be a little high on him, but he was a kid that was injured. But man, if you look at how productive he was in previous seasons, I think you could go down all the way to the fourth round, Zach. I don't know if you've seen Sanker from Virginia yet, or Castro from Iowa, Ransom from Ohio State. These are guys are strong safety type bodies. There are a couple of free safeties that mix. I think that there's some interchangeable pieces there. But yeah, if you're interested right now in addressing the safety position, I kind of feel like you've got a really good shot at it at the top of the board. And, you don't have to start round 4. You don't have a pick. But that's kind of where I have Sanker. I mentioned him, Castro, Ransom, those kinds of guys in that spot. So you're either going to have to probably go early, like you said, at 44, or think about this thing, in the third round, because you're not going to be able to, unless, you grab a fourth round pick, a trade back situation, you're kind of probably stuck right now and maybe a little bit limited of what you can do at that position.
All right, Chaz Reese, do you envision Dowdle getting signed and pairing him with another running back out of the first or second round of the draft?
Yeah, to me, there's I think there's four backs that to me don't need to be paired with anybody. And see if you agree with me on this. I think that Genty from Boise doesn't
Mhm.
need to be paired with anybody. I think he could be a feature workhorse back. Johnson from Iowa, I think, could be a workhorse back. I think Hampton from North Carolina can be a workhorse back. And I think Henderson from Ohio State. Those are the four guys that I would absolutely feel like I don't have to have another guy. Now, teams will go and get another guy. But depending on how much you're going to spend, this could just be a $4 to $6 million get for the Cowboys when you start to talk about Rico Dowdle. That's a pretty nice raise for him from a guy that was making $1.2 million. So, but when you look at this draft further down, guys like Sampson from Tennessee, Harvey from Central Florida, Junkins from Ohio State, Neal from Kansas. These are guys that you kind of have to, I think, pair with another guy. So if you go early in this draft, you might take care of that. If you go later, that's where I think you get the guys that you potentially have to pair.
Yeah, I'm with you. I mean, that's when you look at, okay, maybe I'm going day 3, and am I trying to get a Taj Brooks out of Texas Tech?
There you go. Yeah,
I think is a 3-down back, but he lacks the juice. So do I try and find like a Donovan Edwards out of Michigan who does have some speed to pair with him? But I am wondering, and I mentioned this on the show yesterday, we've talked about how there's not like the elite prospects in this class. And when you really want to make sure you hit in the first round, I think the way the league is trending now with all the success of the free agent running backs, I think you're going to see multiple running backs go in the first round this year.
I really like what you've talked about. I know that Vosh Lombardi and I, who I do a podcast with him. We're doing All Right podcast, and we were talking about exactly last night in our podcast what you mentioned. I brought it up. I said Zach Wolchuk made a really excellent point on our show on 105.3 The Fan, the G-Bag Nation, about these running backs, and I think that. It's going to be when you think a guy might be there because he's a running back, people are going to look at that running back room and say, "This is the best player on our board. This running back here. It's Hampton is better than this 3 technique. He's better than this linebacker. He's better than this corner. He's better than this wide receiver." If Dallas is betting on 44 being a sweet spot for them to get a running back, I would be very cautionary if I was them. Because what you might be doing then, okay, maybe you get the likelihood is Genty being gone, Johnson from Iowa being gone, and Hampton from North Carolina being gone, and now at 44 you're left with, okay, do you feel good about Henderson? I feel good about Henderson. I don't know if the Cowboys necessarily feel good about Henderson. Do you feel good about Sampson? I named all those 3rd round guys on my board. So you might be taking a player at running back that's a good player, but you might have to hit him at that 2nd round pick, because if you think he's going to be there when you come back around in the 3rd, that thing might be picked over like a Thanksgiving Day turkey. I mean, it could be just bones and all that left. I mean, not really what you want to do. So you got to really kind of plan how this thing. It's a deep position, but you might end up having to go around early in order to make it work.
Yeah, because I don't know. Like,
it was a good point by you. It was a good point.
Yeah, I mean, TreVeyon Henderson's getting a lot of 1st-round buzz. Teams love him. They love the pass protection. They think he's going to be a better pro. So, and we saw this last year with the Cowboys, because I think in the 2nd round they envisioned Jonathan Brooks is going to fall to us, and he's going to be our guy, the running back out of Texas. Well, Carolina then moved up and took him. So then you ended up round goes by every round, and now you didn't have a 4th round pick where a lot of these guys went. They end up not being able to come out of the draft with a running back. And I do have a big fear, because that is such a big need, and it seems like they're putting such an emphasis when you bring in Clayton Adams and you listen to what Shoddy said and what Stephen Jones said there at the Senior Bowl. We want to be able to run the football. Well, if you want to be able to run the football, I think you need to get a difference-making running back. And I think if Genty's there at 12, he's the pick. But I think there's serious questions. Is Genty going to be there? If he's not, what are you looking to do? Is it move back a little bit, or do you feel comfortable with these other running backs?
Well, I think to me, the problem you're going to run into, Zach, is if I worked for another teams and I was in pro personnel, my responsibility used to be to tell Jerry Jones where I think other teams are going to draft certain positions, and I was able to do it with some success. I mean, when we the '05 draft with when it was Marcus Spears, I said, hey, Minnesota and Cincinnati are going to take a defensive end right in front of us. And Bill Parcells looked at me and goes, why the hell would you say that? And I go, because the owner asked me, and so, but teams they're going to look at Dallas, and Dallas is pretty open for any position they could take would probably help their team. I guarantee you the number one or two need that every pro personnel guy in the league is going to talk about with the Cowboys is running back. And you could very well have another situation where you have somebody trading ahead of you to grab Johnson, Hampton, Henderson, one of these guys. You really are at the mercy because teams, we do a really good job, I think, of covering this team and talking about every single day about where their deficiencies are. And then you got front office talking about we need to run the ball. Coaches, we need to run the ball. Well, you currently can't run the ball right now with how you're configured. So that's something that Dallas is going to have to be worried about. They might very well be in position to grab a back at 44 and then have somebody trade ahead of them and lose that opportunity. They need to be prepared for that.
Big question we got as well is, of course, the Myles Garrett stuff. All right. So do you think that Myles Garrett is possible? What do you see as trade compensation for Myles Garrett? Cooper Kupp has now become available as well. And I know you got some intel on Kupp.
Yeah, I have much more better feel for Cooper Kupp than I do for Myles Garrett. But I think Myles Garrett is going to start with your 12th overall pick, and now you have to make a determination. Is Myles Garrett better than anybody you're going to pick at 12? That's where you have to start. And if you can answer that question, I mean, the same thing happened is here I'm sitting on Radio Row with you, and I walk by Hugh Douglas every day doing radio on WIP, and I remember Mike Lombardi walking into my office at the vet and saying, hey, who do you got in the second round that you really, really like? And I'm like, well, I got this guy, and a guy. Well, is he better than Hugh Douglas? I said, absolutely not. And he says, well, let's take this 2 and go get Hugh Douglas. And so you have to kind of, you have to be able to, if you've got a guy that's better than who you're going to trade for, which there's not very many people that are better than Myles Garrett. Where I think to me that that's, like I say, it's going to probably start with 12, and it's probably going to be some other compensation involved with that as well. You're probably going to, maybe your 1 and your 3 could very well be right out the door. And then that leaves you just with a 2, but you got Myles Garrett, if you want to. The Cooper Kupp one, it seems like to me that 5th round compensation seems to be where my gang of 7 is right now on him. And the question that they're saying is that, hey, you need to the Rams are going to have to pay for part of that salary. So you have to be willing to part with the 5th. You're going to probably take half his salary, which for some teams might very well be worth it for a guy who's been a little banged up, but still very, very productive when he's on his game.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting with the Cooper Kupp stuff. If it's a day 3 pick for me, I'd be very, but then you got to kind of wonder, we've talked about, okay, the pairing of CeeDee Lamb. Cooper Kupp's going to do a lot of that similar stuff where you're going to want to move him around, get him in the slot. Do they envision him as, like, I know, hey, it's a big name, productive receiver. Can he fit with what they want to do in this offense with 2 similar players that excel in the slot with CD? Maybe not, but Myles Garrett, my goodness gracious. At 12, I think that it would be like a Hugh Douglas scenario where, as much as I would love me some Ashton Genty, there's not a player that's better than Myles Garrett. He is 29 years old, so you're going to get him at 30, and maybe you end up getting him on the back half and in the declining part of his career. But the idea of pairing a Myles Garrett, who you can do a lot with on the defensive line and kick him inside certain downs at defensive tackle, but you pair him with Micah Parsons, my goodness gracious, you now have the best pass rush in all of the National Football League. So to me, like Matt Eberflus, I'm sure is like, hey guys, if there's any way we can get Myles Garrett, let's go ahead and make that call.
I think there's people that would absolutely take Myles Garrett over Ashton Genty. I think there would be. I think a lot of Cowboy Nation would, especially the folks that are not interested in taking a first round running back. They're like, hell, we'll happily give up Myles Garrett to be able to do this. I mean, excuse me, happily give up the 12th pick to get a guy like Myles Garrett. Yeah.
Local kid as well. That is fun to think about. But again, there's the contract that comes with that too. And the financial side of that, you're about to have to pay Micah Parsons. Do you have enough room in the salary cap pass, Stephen Jones likes to say, to fit a Myles Garrett in there? I know fans don't want to hear that. I understand it. I get frustrated with the cap stuff as well. But we know how this team operates, and that is very, very real.
Very real.
You are listening to the Love of the Star podcast. The Love of the Star is an Audacy podcast. You can find on the Audacy app or wherever you get your podcast. Zach Wolchuk alongside Brian Broaddus. And Brian, I think anytime we do Love of the Star together, I know Eric Chiafalo will get mixed in here as well, third member of our rotation, as we've taken the baton from Bobby Belt, who will still make an appearance every once in a while here on Love of the Star. Appreciate everybody choosing to listen to us. But we did get a new mock draft out. This is Matt Miller of ESPN. He put out a 2-rounder, baby. And this is a pick that we have not discussed much for the Dallas Cowboys. At 12 overall, he's got the Cowboys going with Matthew Golden, the wide receiver out of Texas. Now, I do think Matthew Golden, we were just discussing fits. That's a great fit next to CeeDee Lamb. That's a true X, a guy who is a big play machine, bad ball catcher, good route runner, physical player. And it seemed like anytime Texas needed a big play this year, Matthew Golden was a guy that came up with it. So I do have him at the top of the second round personally.
I do too.
But he's a top 5 receiver in this draft to me. There's a lot to like about Matthew Golden.
No, you're absolutely right about that, and I think you nailed the player completely with the way you described him. His ability to go get the football, the ability to run the route, to separate, to get open, to make a spectacular catch, the ball skills. The top receivers are going to be McMillan from Arizona, Burden or Mbuka, whichever order you have, Missouri, Ohio State. But Golden's going to be right there in that mix with those guys. I know working with Voch Lombardi, he's got Golden in the first round. And I'm like you, I have him in that number. So if you're talking about Golden, he's potentially going to be player 16, 17, 18 on your board. When you start to talk about if you have 15 first round grades, and I still think that's a pretty lofty spot for him. It's not like you're putting him in the second round to bury him. He's still going to be in the mix when some of these others are taken. And I absolutely guarantee there's going to be some consideration for him in the first round by teams probably near the bottom of the board, and because he's that type of player.
Now, this would be he's got Ashton Genty going all the way at 22 to the Chargers. I know a lot of Cowboy fans that listen, they want all the Ashton Genty buzz. That would be passing on Genty for Matthew Golden. I mean, there's a couple of players here I wouldn't pass on for Golden personally. Jahdae Barron is a guy that scouts might differ. Like, where's he going to end up going? I think he's worth taking in the top half of the first round personally. So that'd probably be the number one guy that the Cowboys are passing on. Igbuka, I do like slightly more than Golden.
Yeah, I do, and I agree with you on that. And the thing with Igbuka has been that he's been a second fiddle to a lot of outstanding receivers coming out of Ohio State. He knows the role. He understands what his responsibilities are. He's super competitive. He is a very grounded kid. When you watch interviews of him, he's one of those kids that took up golf just to take up golf, and his golf swing looks like he's a pro. His dad's very much involved in his life, but in a positive way. So there's things about him. He's played in a lot of huge games. He's played in cold weather games. He's been productive throughout his career without much fanfare. Every time that he has had to step up and make a play, he's done that. There is a lot to love about Igbuka as a player and as a wide receiver and as a fit for that guy that could be that X-receiver for the Cowboys that's got some size to him and is able to run those tough inside routes, the in-breaking routes, to get vertical, the screens. There's a lot of things you could do with a player of his talents.
Second round is where this gets a little interesting for me, from Matt Miller on ESPN. I can't say I would be doing what he has done here. And in the second round at pick 44, he's got the Cowboys going after Elijah Arroyo, the tight end from Miami. He writes, the deep running back class allows Dallas a chance to keep waiting at that position. Getting the rising Arroyo here to pair with Golden in round 1 completely changes the Cowboys offense. Tight end Jason Ferguson will be a free agent after next season, and Arroyo, big red zone target at 6'4", 251. Here's what I don't like about this. I don't love Arroyo as much as he does. I do think there's some drops there that you've got to worry about. The other thing is he's passing. If you want to go tight end, he's got Mason Taylor from LSU going at 55 to the Chargers. I think Mason Taylor is a much better tight end than what you would be drafting there with Arroyo.
Yeah, and I appreciate the LSU love that you've given Mason Taylor, but it's justified. I've watched Mason Taylor play his entire career at LSU. And if you want to talk about Golden and what he brings for Texas and reliability and ability, Mason Taylor is that tight end version of that. And I've seen him play, with Jane Daniels the last 2 seasons, and then also I've seen him play here with Garrett Nussmeier, and so I have a ton of respect for his ability to not only separate, his ability to get down the field. He's a clutch player. You go back and you can watch the Alabama game of a couple of years ago where, they needed the game winner and who they throw the ball to. LSU's got great receivers. Neighbors, Lacey. They've had some guys who they threw the ball to. They threw it to Mason Taylor is who they threw it to. And he is, 3rd and 16, he's going to get 18. 3rd and 3, he's going to get 5. He's that type of player. And so, the tight end, I think you're going to be right about Warren from Penn State. I think you're going to be right about him. People really like Loveland from Michigan. Mason Taylor, I think, is kind of in that group of those guys. Fannin, is a guy that's a pretty nice player. Helm from Texas. I think that Arroyo has been a guy you kind of wonder, he's been injured throughout his career. Nobody benefited more from Cam Ward coming to Miami than this tight end. And I think it's a little high. I think it's actually high by 2 rounds, if you want to be honest. Okay. And so I would look at Taylor, Fanning, Helm over our Miami player here.
Do you consider tight end in play here for the Cowboys? I don't know. I feel like there's other pressing needs for them that I don't know that they can go afford to draft a tight end as high.
Without a 4th round pick, and that's always kind of been the Cowboys' sweet spot. I know that it was, Schoonmaker at 2, I think was a surprise for a lot of folks. Dallas has always found a way. We'll see with Schottenheimer, it could be. I just think with some other needs there now, tight end could very well be like the running back position when you start to talk about best player on the board, because I could say I went through several of them. So you could say, okay, well, is Fanning or Helm better than Swessinger, the
linebacker from UCLA,
linebacker from UCLA, or Harrison, the corner from Kentucky? Is he better than Sampson from Tennessee, the running back? Is he better than Collins, the one technique from Texas? Those are the things you got to kind of ask yourself. Is there a guard there that you might that's where I kind of feel like that you have to be. I think there's some of these tight end positions are going to be probably a little bit better than some of the guys that I named that are kind of in that same round.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. And my gosh, there's so many players that he's got the Cowboys taking this tight end from Miami. And he's passing on a lot of the guys we talked about, like Benjamin Morrison, the corner from Notre Dame. Like, corner's kind of a sneaky need.
Yeah. That's a first round grade on my book. He's got an injured hip, and it's happened a couple of times to him. And this is where I'm going to probably get burned on this one, Zach. I'm going to have Benjamin Morris first round for Notre Dame. And people, the medical, when we get to the combine at the end of the month, maybe there's some people, it's a degenerate, kind of a situation, it's never going to get better, and all of a sudden teams are not going to have him like as a first round player. He's going to be probably second, third, and he'll probably be, because you and I just look at the tape. That's all we do. We don't get
Right.
it. We're not privy to character information, medical information. We just know that if a kid's coming off an injury, we're like, okay, well, let's see how it all plays out. I know of my first round guys, I've got 3 guys that have medical concerns. Morrison's one of them, as far as, something you're going to have to look at and see if it's okay. Reville is another one. East Carolina corner is another guy too.
At ACL, yeah,
They're doing the same thing.
I mean, how the medical there, no doubt, and we'll hopefully we get more information on that with the combine coming up right around the corner. I did want to shout out 2 offensive linemen because I got to do the Shrine Bowl practices last week. And by the way, from the Senior Bowl standpoint, my gosh, Jack Besh, that was such an amazing moment for him
story.
being able to catch that game winner. Yeah, the MVP of the game a month after tragically losing his brother.
Tragic,
He crushed it. I mean, he definitely, I think his stock, I think the tape was already good. But him going out and dominating the one-on-ones in practice and then translating that to the game, I think he really helped his draft stock as well. That might be a player at 44 we can have more discussions about. But offensive tackles, there's 2 guys that, and I asked Dane Berugler, I was like, okay, what round do you see this guy going? He said rounds 5 through 7. And the Cowboys will throw some darts at, we've seen Awesome Richards in the past, Matt Waletzko, Farniak, those guys come to mind. But Jordan Williams, an offensive tackle from Georgia Tech, 6'6", 304. Body type might look a little bit more like a guard, but I like the footwork. I thought he was the best offensive lineman I got to see at the Shrine Bowl, along with Isay Pohl, the Washington State offensive tackle, who's a left tackle, but they gave him right tackle reps, so he can flip both sides there, and he actually held his own. So those are 2 late-round tackles that I liked, that stood out, but goodness gracious, it was all the defensive tackles that were flexing their metal. I mean, Jordan Phillips was amazing. CJ West, my gosh, that dude is an absolute monster. Tonka Hemingway from South Carolina. Brian, how is South Carolina not better? Like, they had a good year. They were hot at the end of the season. But that defense, my goodness gracious.
Oh, they had LSU on the ropes early in the year, and their quarterback got hurt. I mean, they're up on LSU like 17-0 before LSU even is one of those 11 a.m. SEC games. In that stadium, they at night there, Bryce Williams Stadium at South Carolina and Columbia, it is rocking at night. And they had it rocking during the day. Shane Beamer has done a nice job there, but they started off really kind of slow, trying to figure out quarterback play. But yeah, they have a defense that is a rotating front 7 that really can give you problems. And if you want to watch film of Campbell and Jones, the right tackle at LSU play, Emory Jones and those guys, break out that South Carolina tape. If you want to watch any SEC offensive lineman that played South Carolina, break that tape out and you get a pretty good understanding of guys that are probably going to be playing in the NFL every week.
Love the draft talk. It's always a blast. We'll, of course, have more of that, as probably no better way to break down the draft than what we're able to do here at Love the Star, and also, of course, on the draft show, DallasCowboys.com. We'll be back with another episode later on the week, probably Friday. I think that's what we're going to aim for, maybe preview a little bit of the Super Bowl. Can the Cowboys learn anything from these Super Bowl teams? I don't know. Maybe free agency would be one way to look at it. But this has been a blast. Always enjoy getting to chat with you, Brian. And thank you to everybody who's tuning in. Like, subscribe, make sure you're listening, tell your friends. Love of the Star, Audacy Podcast, wherever you can find your podcast. Hugs and hand pounds, everybody. Until next time.